Hello, and welcome to our weekly shir on the Parsha with the commentary of the Alshich. I should apologise for last week's non-appearance to the shir. I have to tell you that I recorded it 3 times, and there's something wrong with my computer, and it disappeared on each occasion. I tried to record this shir last night, and the exact same thing happened. I am now recording this on my iPhone. I am hoping against hope that it's actually going to work and be okay. Anyway, with the help of the Rabbanu Shalom, we should be okay for this week's Parsha, which is Mishpatim. The Parsha Mishpatim obviously deals with the legal process, judges, the appointment of police officers, etc. Let us have a quick read at the first few psukim of the Parsha, and then we will move straight to the Alshich and hear what he has to say. So, in Parshas Shoftim it says, Shoftim v'shotrim titin lecha. You must appoint judges and law officers, that would be in our terminology policemen. Titin lecha b'kol sharecha, you will appoint in all of your gates. Now, of course, the gate is where the courts were situated, walled cities, generally large towns in the period of the Torah in the Middle East. There was a wall going around it, there were gates, and at the gates there is situated the Beis Din, so that people can freely see and freely have access to justice. So throughout all of the cities, the gates, which Hashem is giving to you, to your shvatim, to your various tribes, and they will judge the people righteously, correctly. That's the first pasuk. Let's look at the second. Lo sita mishpat, sata mishpat. You will not pervert justice. Lo sakir ponim. You won't show favoritism to one person over any other person. Lo sika shachad. You will not take a bribe. We'll talk about that shortly. Ki hashachad yaver eni chomim. So the Torah wants to expand on that straight away and say that a bribe, and we're not exactly, the Torah doesn't express or go into the details of what that is. That's going to be up to us to do. Perverts or blinds the eyes of those who would normally be tzedek, who would normally be okay. Yaver eni chomim, it blinds the eyes of the wise. The Salav Divrei Tzadikim perverts the words of saints. And in the last pasuk, tzedek tirdof, you will pursue justice. Tirdof laman tichye, in order you will live, and you will inherit the land, which Hashem, the Lord your God, is giving to you. Now, I knew somebody many years ago who spent a lot of time in court because he was a doctor, and he testified in all sorts of insurance cases, either for the insurance company, or for the person trying to get money out of the insurance company, yay. Anyway, but he once told me something very interesting. He said there is nothing as eccentric and perverse as a jury. Normally being brought up in Western society, we generally look upon juries as being the ultimate guarantor that justice is seen, because as a panel of your peers, it will just, the ordinary man or the ordinary woman whose wisdom seems to be the bulwark against the corruption of law. He said total nonsense. So many times he's seen people who are clearly guilty be exonerated by a jury, and people who are clearly innocent be convicted by a jury. To find courts that operate justly is not such an easy thing as I used to, as a young man, imagine, and maybe Hollywood films and TV programs, with the heroic lawyer and the ordinary man standing up against the corrupt bench, judges, etc. That's not quite so clear-cut, and we see that a lot, of course, in today's world. Okay, let's see what the Alshich has to say on these psukim that we've just analysed. Oh, before I turn to Alshich, let's turn to Rashi, because after all, Rashi is the classic and standard commentator. So he says 2 things here, where he says a lot more, but 2 things I want to extract. When it says the Shoftis Amen, they will judge the people, mishpat tzedek, righteously. What's it mean, judge the people? Mona dayanim mumchim v'tzadikim lishpat tzedek. You must employ judges who are chachomim, who are mumchim, who are expert in law. It can't just be a case of something that you can, just say, you be a dayan. What do you think? Somebody has to know halacha inside out. But apart from their expertise in matters of Jewish law, they have to be tzaddikim. You have to appoint judges who are tzaddikim, saintly, b'shoftes ha'am, and then they'll be able to judge the people well. Now, I don't know, as Rabbi Chonin Wasserman in his beautiful essay, the first essay in Kodetz Mamorim, which I don't think we're going to have time to go into in depth, although I was tempted to do so, points out that if you contrast and compare the standards of morality and behavior of judges who operate in secular courts to the dayanim who operate in religious courts, not for one moment, as I'll show you in a second, to say that it's absolutely guaranteed and an absolute reality. Of course, there are corrupt judges and corrupt bati din as well. However, what's required of judges, dayanim, is not just that they're expert, as I'm sure judges in secular courts have to be, but they also have to be morally expert or morally convinced and determined to live a moral life and to apply moral principles. That, of course, you don't find amongst judges, and there are so many horrible cases of judges being found to be behaving as appallingly as the people they are supposed to be sitting in judgment of. There was just a case last week, in the United States of America, of a judge who would, for sexual favors, let women who were accused of various crimes off. That's corrupt. But of course, that's an individual. It's just that, as we all know, that in the judicial system in the United States of America, it is an easy matter to select a jurisdiction, a court's jurisdiction, or a court in a certain state which has a certain political preference or bias, and that's where you bring your case to. Now, I vote as an American citizen in American elections, and you can guess or not guess if you're not interested in which way I vote. But I don't care in the political divide which way your prejudices lie. The fact, to my mind, that people can pursue a case in a court because you already know it has a certain bias and favoritism is a complete denial from a Jewish point of view of the concept of tzedek tirdov, of selecting a court, selecting a justice system to find truth and fairness in. I used to think, in my naivety, that the English judicial system, I won't comment on Scottish, but the English judicial system was really pretty fair and that judges were pretty neutral. Sadly, we've seen over the last few years that the English judicial establishment are just as prejudiced and just as biased as the American one, which is utterly appalling. And I don't have to mention the Israeli one, where frankly it is a complete and total farce when it comes to lack of bias and prejudice. And then, of course, you go to places like China, etc., where there is no justice at all. The courts are just an adjunct of the Communist Party. That's not what Torah is. The Torah's demand is of judges or judgment. It has to be that it's completely objective. So that's the first Rashi. The second Rashi I wanted to point out, it says tzedek tirdov, the tzedek tirdov idea, justice you will surely pursue. Holach achal beis din yofi. Rashi says that means pursue a beis din, which is a beis din yofi, which is a good beis din with a good reputation. Ergo, there are bati din, Jewish courts, which are not possessed of a good reputation. There are dayanim who are not possessed of a good reputation, either incompetent or corrupt. As the Torah says, go after non-corrupt and competent bati din. By definition, there will be and are ones which are not, can't fulfill that high standard. You've got to go for the good ones. Okay, we've looked at these three psukim. If you want to pause this and go and grab the Chumash to review it before we move on further, that's fine. But in order to keep this hopefully working and short in duration, let's move on here. So this is what the Alshich has to say. He says there are three categories of people who are being addressed really in these few psukim. So let me read you a few of his questions, then we'll go to some of his answers. Roy Lawson laid us that it's important, imperative that you pay attention to the fact that it says, El Omra L'cho, Shoftim v'Shoftim Titin L'cho. Now, as we know, and those who have been with me in these sharing before, incidentally, you'll have noticed the new background, and this is because I'm now videoing this on my iPhone, which hopefully will not suffer the same problem as my computer. And people complain all the time that rabbis are always seated making videos behind all their sforim, which I obviously often do as well, usually do as well. Well, as I can't sit there, I'm sitting here in our dining room before I set up for Shabbos, because we're in Erev Shabbos. So you've got a whole new background. This is real, by the way. So now you know that it's not a nice background. This is our living room here in Jerusalem. Welcome to pop by sometime. Anyway, it says Shoftim Shoftim Titin L'cho. So there's no word in the Torah that is extra. And L'cho seems to be extra. Why not just say Shoftim Shoftim Titin? You will appoint judges and policemen throughout your Bekol Sharecha in all of your cities. So why does it have to say Titin L'cho? And why is it in the singular? Why not Lochem? Then, next question, he says, not only that, it says Hashem Noisen L'cho, which Hashem is giving you. Well, we know that Hashem's giving it to us, so why does it have to state the obvious? And it says V'shoftas Am, and they will judge the people. And he writes, Ki lo yoda ki es ha'am yishpatu. Don't we know that we're talking about him judging the people? There are, most beautiful dog competitions, most beautiful cat competitions, and for all I know, most beautiful budgerigar competitions. But that's not what we're going to think that this is talking about. So why does the Torah have to qualify that? So the Alshich, as I said before, says that these three psukim are addressing three categories of people. We'll have time to just deal with two. The first is the person who is actually appointing the judges, making the appointment of judges. The second is addressing the judges themselves. And the third is the litigants, the people coming to the court, either prosecuting somebody or defending against the prosecution, which is the category we won't have time to get into today. In regards to the first one, he says, it is very, very common, and this again resonates today very, very much with all of the judicial systems that I mentioned before. You will tend to find that judges are appointed generally by people of power and influence, often rich people. It could well be the case, therefore, that if somebody appoints a judge, spends money cultivating the judge's appointment, his campaign, funds his campaign, and then one day finds himself standing in front of the judge, then it's not beyond the imagination of most of us to consider that it's a strong possibility that this judge, if he turns around and says, let's say the rich guy's called Yaakov, and the other guy's called, Abram, you might turn around to Yaakov and think, wow, you got me the job. There may be prejudice there, but suppose he doesn't. Suppose he turns around and says, Mr. Yaakov, you're guilty, and you owe Mr. Avram $10 million. Then can't you imagine the fellow turning around and saying, chutzpah, I got him the job, the schnips, the non-existence, and I promoted him, and now this is what he does to me. And if the policeman he's appointed as well starts schlepping him out of the court because he's been sentenced to a period in jail, you can imagine the outrage. That's why it says, Shoutim b'shoitrim, judges and law officers, titin l'cho, you, the guy who's doing the appointing, so selecting the judge. You've got to select them so that you'll be willing to listen to what they say to you, not just a question of, you're pulling their strings, which so often is the case, as I mentioned at the outset. And in fact, you find hard to imagine. I remember many years ago, when Lord Jonathan Sacks was the chief rabbi of the UK, the person who had financed or sponsored his preferment and his election was a very, very rich individual. I won't mention him by name, but he was used to getting things done his way. And he hoped and expected that in getting, as he claimed that he did get, the position of chief rabbi for Jonathan Sacks, that Jonathan Sacks would be malleable or sympathetic to a shift in the balance of orthodoxy in Anglo-Jewry into a more left-wing direction, which accommodated his own particular family's needs. Well, again, without going into details. With respect to Jonathan Sacks, Colic Avod, he always respected the judgment of Diane Earnshaw, the Beasting and the London Beasting. And no matter what the expectations of Mr. Rich Guy was, Jonathan Sacks would not go against the decisions or the perspective of Diane Earnshaw. This outraged this particular fellow, who wrote a letter to the Jewish Chronicle. I don't know if you're not British, you won't be familiar with the Jewish Chronicle, and lucky you. But if you're American, it's the largest Jewish newspaper, but it's reform in orientation, and certainly anti-orthodox in approach, and consequently, Mr. Rich Guy wrote to it, complaining and saying in black and white, I bought him this job. I don't think he said bought him, but I got him this job. And as he hadn't been able to do what the fellow wanted, and he made that quite clear, then he should resign. You see, that's the exact opposite of what it's saying here. You appoint judges who will administer judgment without favoritism to either side, including the person who you may have campaigned for and financed his aliyah, his moving through the ranks till he actually secured the top job. That's not a Jewish position. So the first thing, it's speaking to you. The second thing, it's speaking to the appointers of the judges, now the judges themselves. The judges themselves, what does it say there? It says, each Shoftim Shoftim we said before, the culture record throughout all of your cities, all the gates and all your cities, which Hashem is giving to you in the present tense. Now, the Medrash famously says, and the Alshich expands upon this in the Medrash in Medrash Rus, and when it's talking about the story of Ruth, it starts off by saying, "Vahi b'mishvat Shoftim, vahi ba'orov ba'oretz." And it wasn't the days when the judges judged; there was a famine in the land. But the Alshich translates that it wasn't the days when they judged their judges, when they put the judges on trial. Again, something we see a lot today, particularly in the United States of America. The judges are expected by the people whom they deal with to have that bias. A lot of the people want them to have that bias. So basically, it's saying in each of these tribes, "Shofta es ha'am mishpat tzedek." You will judge the people mishpat tzedek. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about in each city, and each city is part of the territory of each tribe. So if I was a Dayan, a judge in the Beasting of Reuven, let's say the largest town in Reuven, the territory of the Shevet of the tribe of Reuben. Suppose I've got two people in front of me contesting a case. One of them is a Reubenite from my tribe. The other one is a Shemonite from another tribe. Then it can't be that I show favoritism to one over the other. Not at all. It's judge. That's why the Pasuk says, "Shofta es ha'am," judge the people. It doesn't qualify what kind of people it is from the tribe of this, from the tribe of that. No, the Jewish people, all equally. There must be no favoritism shown whatsoever. These are a couple, just a sniff of what the Alshich has to say there. But I think we all are familiar with when it comes to Jewish law, no bias, no prejudice, no favoritism is allowed. And with regards to, as we mentioned before, the quality of the judges, one of the requirements of a judge is a Jewish judge is he's a Soni Betza. He hates money. He doesn't value money. That means say for himself. Not to say that he doesn't think money is important. He knows the value of money. He's going to be dealing with financial cases. But rather, he's somebody, it's not his ambition. He can't be bought. He's either independently rich or he doesn't value it in the first place. That's critical. There must be no bias. You can't buy it. And how much constitutes a bribe to a judge? For that was Rabbi Dessler, his famous essay in Chelik Aleph of Mechta Milion in page 154. And there Rabbi Dessler says, in page 154, page 54, he tells the Gemara, the story that appears in the Gemara in Ksubas and Kufhain 105 on the base, side B, about somebody called Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi. And the story there famously told, Rabbi Shaul bar Rabbi Yossi had a tenant farmer, a sharecropper. In other words, he had property which he wanted to develop, I don't know, orchards, vineyard or something. He was too busy being a rabbi to actually do the work himself. He found somebody who had no employment, but had a good work ethic and was, was an honest fellow. And he said, okay, you'll be my sharecropper. You'll take 40%, or whatever the percentage they agree is, 50%, I suppose it could be 50-50, of the produce. You work the land, you'll get 50%, and I'll get 50%. And this is a win-win situation for both. And that's what happened. Part of the agreement was that from the 50%, or from the proportion of the produce, every week during the season when it was producing food, that the oris, the sharecropper, would bring Erev Shabbos on a Friday, excuse me, a basket of fruit to Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi's house. So he would have it on his Shabbos table. One week, as the fellow was going to a Bet Din, or going to a Din Torah in the town, he thought, well, I'm passing the rabbi's house anyway on my way to town. Why have to go back the next day if I can just drop it off a day early? And so he brought the basket of fruit a day early. When he opened the door, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi saw the fellow standing there, and the fellow explained, sorry, I'm going to the Din Torah, I'm just bringing you your basket of fruit. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi refused to take the fruit a day early. Not only did he refuse to take the fruit a day early, believing that the benefit he would be getting from having that fruit a day early might be a benefit that could, to the nth degree, corrupt his ability to judge objectively, he disqualified himself from being a judge, recused himself from hearing the case. Somebody else took over. Later that day, as the Gemara goes on to say, he was going through past the Beis Din, and the Beis Din is a very noisy place. One of the conditions of going in front of a Beis Din is that neither of the two people claims against each other can speak before the other one speaks. How does that work? They both have to be able to speak at the same time. So often, in courts operating under English common law, the prosecution presents its case, the defense challenges it, and then it's back and forth with witnesses. But the Torah is concerned that the first version of the narrative, even though it's going to be challenged, will somehow root itself, even at a very subconscious level, in the ears of the judges, or maybe the jury in this case, and it'll be hard to shift. So both have to be able to speak at the same time. So Reuven says, well, we were business partners, and we started business in 2019, it's 2020, and the fight starts right from the get-go, from the very beginning. Anyway, back to this. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi recused himself from hearing the case. He's going past the case. It's a very noisy affair for the reasons that they're shouting at each other, as I just explained. And he hears the case and the judges questioning and challenging what has been said. And consistently he found himself saying, if I hadn't recused myself, I would definitely have been able to say that, ask a question would prove that my tenant farmer is right. And the more he listened, the more he was convinced that the tenant farmer was right. His tenant farmer was right. Until he analysed exactly what was going on in his mind, in which he came to the conclusion, excuse me, that indeed the tiny amount of benefit that he got by receiving, or the fact that the guy wanted him to receive his fruit a day early, was indeed prejudicing him. How much, what constitutes a bribe in Jewish law? It's not a Rolls Royce, it's not a Learjet. It's the smallest amount possible, smallest coin. When I grew up, there was a half penny. There was a penny and a half penny, a halfpenny. That would constitute a bribe. You would think, oh, come on, that's something that nobody could be seriously influenced by. It depends on circumstances. Don't forget the famous thing in chaos theory. Was that fellow? What was his first name? I can't remember. Lorenz, who was a meteorologist, who claimed that the fluttering of a butterfly's wing here could set off, hypothetically, a tornado in another part of the world. You just don't know what the effect a tiny thing can have. What you do need to know is that the people judging the case are immune, or seek to become immune to prejudice, to bias, who will judge everybody equally and seek to judge everybody equally, who are people who don't and aren't influenced by money, who don't recognize the big rich guy in front of them who got them the job, who are there in order to make sure that what the Torah has to offer is emes, and that the judgment is emes as well. That's also, if you can have corrupt courts, the Torah says, seek out the emes court, the court of emes, the dayanim of emes. Seek out the rabbi and the rebbetzin of emes, and let them discover the emes that exists and should exist within every Jewish heart. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos. I will reach over and switch off this video and hopefully it works.